Hello, everybody. Welcome on the Lights on Data show. Today, we're going to cover how to create a data viz that sticks. And to do that, our guest is Lee Feinberg, the Chief Data Officer and the creator of the concept Intent Before Content. Welcome, Lee.
Thanks for having me, George. Great to be here.
So, Lee, tell us a little bit about your journey, your story, and how did you end up where you are right now?
By accident, probably like most people.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, it actually started about 20 years ago, I would say. And I was working at a client and they wanted to redo their website. It's a big insurance company. And I just asked the simple question, well, why? And I said, what information do you have that would help us understand what areas we should tackle? And they gave me a Word document. It was about a 70-page Word document that their marketing agency created. And all it was screenshots from their web analytics tool. And so I asked, well, who reads this? And they said, nobody. And I realized at that moment that there was obviously a huge problem, but also an opportunity in understanding really how to use data to make decisions, not just to have a report that would come out. And of course, back then it was fairly rudimentary to begin with. It's certainly not like the way we have analytics today on stuff like that. And then it just became kind of a passion of mine to figure out how to do things. And I was by trade an engineer and then a marketer. So I always had this idea of there's always a better way to do something. How do you break down the process? And over the years, the tools were getting better and better. And just about 10 years after that, I found Tableau. It was still a pretty small company at the time. I think there were about 75 people there, and brought it into the company.
Do you remember what version you were using?
I was using version 4.
Nice.
And then 5 came out shortly after that. Yeah. So it was about 2009. And the company I was at was Nokia, which was the phone company. And eventually we became their largest customer at the time, which is probably pretty small compared to now. But I just got very involved with Tableau in different ways over the years, and then left to go on my own. And that's really where everything started. And throughout that 10 years before we got to Tableau, what I was doing is figuring out at the different companies I was at how to do the work better. Always, how do we figure out how to build this as a process so that everybody on the team does the work the same way, rather than here's the tool, whether it's PowerPoint or Excel or Tableau or Power BI, whatever it is today. Instead of just giving somebody the tool and say, just do what you want, we needed a structure around it. So I was always working towards building that so that our teams could be much more efficient and consistent in how they did their work. And that was where this idea of intent before content was born. And the meaning behind that is really, you have to know the message that you want to communicate before you can start building anything, or before you can start authoring any kind of dashboard, or I like to think of authoring stories, not developing a dashboard. I like to think of it as a higher level activity that you're doing.
The dashboard is just a medium that you're conveying the story through.
Exactly. But most people start doing that kind of work. It might be something like, well, someone asks them for sales data. And then they go off and they just start collecting sales data, and they make charts and they stick them into dashboards. And then what happens? Somebody says, that's not what I want. And you go through this vicious cycle, right? And so kind of reverse the process and say, well, how do we don't even know what we're doing yet. What's the point of all of this? And giving people a way to figure that out is kind of a part of the process that I created. And it's pretty straightforward, but it really changes the approach that people use, and a lot of it is more cultural in the end. You can teach somebody and tell them what to do and give them kind of a, not quite a script, but some ideas to follow. The challenge is they have to change their own behavior. And until that happens, none of the other stuff matters. I can tell you all of what you should do, but until you actually do it,
Yeah.
and that's the hard part about all of this, is the cultural and the behavioral side.
Yeah. Let's unpackage this a little bit more. Already, your tagline is really hitting with the audience. Scott Taylor, the data whisperer, who's also a great storyteller, by the way, says intent before content, love it. Ioana as well, loving this as well. So, I feel that already sticks the tagline. So what I wanted to ask you about the intent before content. So you mentioned, well, let's find out what they need, what they want, what's the intent before we're putting all this effort into the solution. Do you also take a look at, well, who is it for? You try and analyze the audience itself.
Yeah, not quite at that level. I wouldn't say analyze the audience, but certainly know the audience. And actually,
Hmm.
this is a huge problem, again, with most of the way that I've seen people do the work that I used to do. This kind of work as a practitioner is, a lot of times when you deliver something, you create it in a way that you say, well, I want a lot of people to use it. And so it almost sometimes becomes like a fancy way to access the database, right? You give somebody a dashboard, and then there's a lot of filters and options on it, right? So here it is, anybody can come in and use it. And the problem is it almost becomes unusable for everybody when you do that. So you tried to make this thing that was one size fits all, and it's almost one size fits none.
Hmm.
And so by knowing who your audience is, you actually end up having to make multiple stories. But the process that we created is actually lets you do the work faster and do it without a lot of rework. But you do have to tend to create more of it, but it's
Hmm.
targeted, right? And the idea behind that, the simple way to think about it is, again, I mentioned come from product marketing, is to think about your output, again, your dashboards, as a product. Don't think of it as like the work of making the dashboards. And so when you think about it as a product, it brings a whole different framework that you can apply, not only to how to do the work, but how you handle it and how it fits within the workflow of the organization. And uh, so you tailor it to your audience, you tailor it to what they need. And it scares a lot of people away to hear that. Now I have to do more work. Yes, but you're going to do it faster and better.
Hmm. Love it. And Adam is mentioning, yes, always know who your audience is, and how you're mentioning, treat it as a product. He's mentioning that it's probably no different than any other approach to developing. Do you feel your engineering days sort of had some influence over this concept?
Yeah, it did, because the work I did as an engineer fits very well with thinking through processes. It's kind of funny. I'll just Some folks may remember the old AT&T. I used to work for Bell Labs, the old AT&T black business telephones. And my job was to think about every interaction that happened on that phone, and based on every interaction, what the reaction would be. And so it was very detailed, thinking through what those sequences of events were, and again, kind of like who the user was and the things that they did. And so I think somehow internally that translated into thinking through some of this kind of the process of this, and understanding uh, who the user was and how they would use it.
Nice. I'm curious, as you're going through that exercise with the end user, with the audience, do you try and storyboard, or do you try and sketch what the solution might be on, with pen and paper?
Yeah, actually, that's a really important part of the process that we teach people, is to stay away from your application as long as possible for several reasons. One, the act of storyboarding actually can lead to some innovation. Here's what I mean. If you jump right into the tool, you basically are only doing what you've already learned about how to use in that tool at the moment. When you sketch something out, what you're doing is saying, I know what my intent is. So how do I best reflect that, say, visually?
Mm-hmm.
And so you don't constrain yourself. And then once you create that idea, then you will try to implement it, of course. And you may not get it perfect. It might not be 100% of what your idea was, but maybe you get to 95%. And that's a lot better if you had just jumped right in and tried to do it. Also, when you just go in and build out a dashboard and show it to people, they already think it's finished.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things we talk about with my students, if we're doing a workshop with them, is the worst thing that can happen is you show someone your storyboard and they say, "Oh, it's great," and they give you no comments. Because most people think, "Oh, I did a really great job." And it's like, no, that's the worst thing. It means they really didn't pay attention and really think through it. And it's kind of opposite about right what you would expect. And I say you have to find out what's wrong with it. But again, if you developed it in something like Tableau and someone told you that, you'd think, great, I'm going to hit the publish button and I'm done and I can go on and do something else. And it's really not the case.
Absolutely. This reminds me of a conversation I was part of yesterday, and somebody from Hong Kong, they were mentioning that culture plays such an important role when you're getting that feedback from the audience. And she was mentioning that, for example, in Hong Kong, if you're asking an individual for feedback, how something could be better, they would probably not tell you. They don't want to tell you something negative. But if somehow they're able to provide that feedback in an anonymous way, then they'll definitely do it and be honest and tell you ways on how whatever you're presenting them could be improved.
Yeah, that's really a big thing because you have to draw it out because they're going to tell you later. That's the thing. That's the problem, right? Once you finish it, then they'll start pointing out the problems, and that's the worst time for it to happen. So it will. It's just you want it to happen much sooner in the cycle for
Mm-hmm.
everybody's sake. That's why I said it's kind of part of that idea of you can do more work, but you can get it done faster if you know some of these things you have
Mm-hmm.
to tackle, and it's challenging.
So for those of you those of us that can't draw very well and are really fumbling, even creating boxes on a piece of paper to try and outline the different pieces of data visualization, do you have any recommendations or any tools that you might use to do that? Because I feel, if you're an expert in Power BI, Tableau, Click, what have you, you feel that, it's easy enough for me just to go in and create it. Even if it's in draft mode, I feel it's so much easier for me to put a pen on paper and
Mm-hmm.
do a similar thing. And it saves me time. So why not do it? And I understand why from the reason why you've told me. And I think that, it's brilliant, and I never really thought about it, that the fact that if you're presenting it in the tool itself, the audience will treat it as, oh, okay, it's a final product, and they're already getting antsy
Yeah.
and maybe a little bit annoyed as well. um, yeah, do you have any tools that you would recommend? Or
Yeah, I occasionally it also can be a bit of a sequence too. So first of all, I'm not great at drawing, and in fact, it's almost like you could think the worse you are, the better,
mm,
because what you want to do is not be tempted to go into too much detail.
mm-hmm,
Right? The idea, you just want to get the idea across. You don't even know what the data is, right? So you just have to make something up on the page. You don't put numbers down. You just say, oh, I'll make a bar chart, or I'll make a line chart, or an XY plot, or whatever it's going to be. I'll just sketch it out quickly. And if I just want to explain it to somebody and get the idea across to them about what it's trying to achieve. And of course, you'll also have the titles of each of these charts and visuals as well. And so I might do that, and as a first step, just to make sure we're on the right track. And then I might even use PowerPoint or Keynote. I've used Sketch before, just to make kind of a higher def version.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost, you think about it, when somebody is creating a website, usually they do something like that. So they do a wireframe of it, and maybe they put a little bit of creative on top of it, but the
Mm-hmm.
creative aspects should really come at the end,
Mm-hmm.
uh, because that's, until you get the message right, you shouldn't add all those other elements. But people are tempted to always add all that other stuff in, because uh, they think it looks better that way. And so, but that's another reason to stay away and do it on paper, is to not add all those other creative elements that can be a distraction, or again, make people think it's more finished than it is. So I really try to stay with paper. I have whiteout, I mean, literally, and I do it with a Sharpie, so that I can't write too much detail. So I don't even do a pen or pencil.
Oh, that's a good advice. Adam was mentioning that's me, degree in design, and I can't draw for a squat. So,
Yeah,
uh,
join the club.
so Lee, we know who our audience is. We understand the intent. We have our sketch ready. Is there anything else that we need to do before we apply those best practices in data visualization?
Yeah. So one of the kind of other pieces of intent before content is the idea of using questions. So if you think about when you do a project like this, uh, it's to answer questions of some sort. But if you think about what's actually on a dashboard, you usually see something like sales, year over year profit, uh, spending, regional distribution, which are barely even statements,
Mm-hmm.
and they're open to interpretation based on your audience, right? So if I just put sales and you're in marketing or you're in finance, you're going to have your own thoughts about what might be on that chart. And so the title of your dashboard, of the first, it's really like chapter 1 of your story, so the first page, each of those chapters should have a question, and it should be as specific as possible, because that sets up in people's minds what the rest of that page will be. And then each of the elements on those page, each chart should also have a question. So instead of sales, it would be something like sales in what are the sales in each of our regions? It could be something as simple like that, but it's specific.
Mm-hmm.
Even if it was a map below that, you want to be clear, because again, number one, you're being specific and you're setting it up in someone's mind. But the little trick here is that when someone sees a question, you're almost forced naturally to want to answer that. And so it draws you in to
Mm.
looking at it and saying, yeah, what is the answer to that question? And so naturally, you're bringing people and engaging them in a kind of conversation with that page, rather than sales. Oh yeah, I see the sales, and then they just keep moving on, and they're not really maybe even paying attention to something. So it's a way to kind of persuade people to think about it in a way, and it's kind of a little bit of a ninja move if you want to think about it like that. So that's an important piece of this as well. Before, you can't just say sales, and even the sketches have to have that on there for the same reason, because the sketch, if I show it to you, when it has that question, it's helping you again think about what the message is, and then you'll say, yes, I get that from your sketch, or I don't, or we figure out how to adjust it. So that's the other big piece.
That's such a great tip. Thank you. That's my big takeaway. Well, one of them from today. Always pose it as a question.
Yeah.
Do you sometimes feel that your stakeholders, your audience, is telling you how they want to see that answer portrayed.
You mean like make sure it looks really good so the bad numbers don't show up kind of thing?
Yeah, one exactly. Maybe, oh, just filter out those outliers. We don't want to see them here. Or yeah, let's just take out all the sales coming in from that company. Or even telling you, I really want this in a bar graph or in a pie chart.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so those are two kind of different scenarios. So the first one, the nice thing is because it's a sketch, you don't know what the data is really. So at
Hmm.
that moment, there's no way to say, yes, this is something specific I want to handle. Now you might show it in a way that they say, wait a second, I don't want I don't want those bars to show up as negative or something like that. Can you take them out? They might say something like that, and and this is a major issue anyway, right? That question you asked is overall when you start showing the numbers or when you can see things better, people get more resistant in general because they might see something they don't expect, right? They might see it negative and they just don't want to tell a bad story, right? Those are
Hmm.
things you have to handle in with responses like, well, that's the way it is. How are we going to fix it? Right? If
Hmm.
we hide it, we can't fix it. So that's a kind of a different thing. In terms of show it this way or show it this way, uh, just because that's the idea I came in with, it might not be the best way for you to understand it. But just because you say make it as a bar chart, I'm not going to do it necessarily. What I would say something like is, hey, George, if we change it to a bar chart, how would it help you understand that better? And then I can, that way, you might just say, I just like bar charts,
Hmm.
right? And then we have to have a discussion about that. Or you might actually explain it to me why, and I might say, okay, that makes sense, and let's figure out what the best way is, right? So I want to understand. I don't just want to react to you because you said it. Even if you're the CEO of the company, as a CEO of the company, you probably know very little about visualization, really, right?
Yeah.
Uh, or should care. So I shouldn't just react that way because you're the CEO. This is my job. You have your job. Again, cultural thing. People are used to just saying, okay, I'll make it in a bar chart, and that might not be the best solution.
Yeah. Or even worse, give it to me in a grid table.
Exactly. That, yeah. So these are a lot of what we talk about with students is how to handle these situations and actually make them practice it. It's almost like going up on stage and rehearsing,
Mm-hmm.
because if you can't do it in a safe environment, you're certainly going to revert back to your old behavior when you're faced with it in the workforce. So we want to make you comfortable and try to get a better feel for how you would react and what it's like to have those words literally come out of your mouth.
Yeah, that sounds great. That should be part of any training program. So now I feel like we have a really strong foundation for us to create our data story, to create our data visualizations. Let's step into our best practices and see how we can create a data visualization that sticks.
Yeah, so actually I could show you kind of what a progression might look like here. So this is a typical response to something like get me the, show me the sales, right?
Hmm.
And so you get, of course, a table for the regions. You get a line chart. It shows you where things are good, where things are bad. And then, of course, you get the map because you want to show it by region. So there's a lot going on here. And this is pretty common kind of thing that people might do. That's one version. Uh, you might get and this is because they just jump right into the software. Some people might do something more like a scorecard. So they show a few big tiles and then they show a table. And then some people might do something like this. They say, I want to do the cool dashboard, right? So they pull out all the tricks. They've got the tree maps. They've got you know, the black background, and bubble charts. They did everything here. So these are the three different ways people might do it. And then you might have somebody who's a little bit more refined, which is great. But all of these are about the data. They've got some questions here, which is good. That's a good start. But when you get to the end, when you really get through and think about what somebody wants, and in this case, what they really wanted to know was, how do we realign the sales territories? And when you know what that is, you take a completely different approach to creating your story. In fact, we call these analytic stories because we don't want to say dashboards or reports or anything like that. We wanted people to think about it differently, that it's really supposed to help you do an analysis. So if you think about this question, the first thing we had to understand is, well, what would you actually consider poor performance? So we let them put in their own values, and then immediately you see out of the 10 regions that 3 of them are in the white zone. So those are good, and 7 out of the 10 are in the kind of the red zone. And then the next step here is that you don't even include those 3 anymore. The 3 that are good, they're out. And typically you would include them. You're always going to show all the regions, but we already know they don't matter. And then we find out, well, okay, how would you make your decision about which ones you should target? Because you can't deal with all of them at once. And they gave us some rules there. And so something simple like this, the goal, and this might sound strange, the goal is actually to have them spend the least amount of time reading the story, not the most, right? If they could look at this and say there's nothing to do, that would be awesome. Otherwise, help them read through it as fast as possible. Right? Most people design these as in a way they want people to go in and study every number and chart, and why would I want to do that? I just have something I need to figure out and get back to my work. So so the end product here ends up being very different based on understanding what the point is of this product. And of course, there's other pieces, there's other chapters to go in this story. This isn't the end of it here. This is just the beginning, but we want them to stop reading as soon as possible.
I love that. Do you tell multiple chapters on different sheets, on different visualizations, and do you try and link them with each other?
Yeah, in fact, if you kind of click through this one, you would link through. The other habit to break for people is, if you think back, I've been doing this a long time, really before the internet was really anything like it is today. You used to print out your pages. And I think that was another reason people used to try to jam so much stuff on your page. We don't really need to do that now. Everything's online. And if it's not online, it's certainly electronic. And so you can paste things much faster. And the other thing is, the less you have on the page, there's less distractions, right? And each page should really have tied to a message. If you have multiple messages on the page, it gets much harder to figure out what's going on. So I can just kind of flip through this real fast, right? I can read the title, know what's there, and then just keep going. It's much smoother, and it's a better experience for the reader as well, because I'm not having to soak in as much information, which is another thing, right? People just want to have so much on there, and you really want to have the least amount on there to help get that message across.
Absolutely. Speaking of printing, I don't know what your experience is, but definitely it is mine that even when you're designing something in these interactive tools like Tableau, Power BI, Click, people were still asking it to be print ready. And they were still printing it a lot. They were used to print it, look at it in closer details, maybe make some notes with their pen. And in a way, one of the positive things of the pandemic is that it forced them not to print anymore. And they got more use with the digital version of it. And now we're seeing less demand of that.
Yeah, that's a lot of a sense. And
yeah,
I used to make a joke way back when people would ask they wanted to reduce printing. And because these documents, I told you about those documents we used to write about the phones and stuff, they were hundreds of pages long. And I joked, I said, if you want people to print less, just get rid of the printers. And people are like, what? I'm like, well, yeah, that's the solution. They didn't understand how simple that was. They're just so used to having it in hand, they just couldn't grasp that idea.
Yeah, it's the whole change management portion that gets applied to everybody. They're just used to do things in a certain way that it takes them on a journey to be able to move from how they were used to doing things. Even though they're better, it takes a while to get them adjusted to the new way.
Yeah.
So now we'll probably, go and see those data stories in virtual reality and be able to interact and walk through the story, and who knows what's going to come up.
That would be pretty cool. Minority Report stuff.
Exactly. Well, thank you so much, Lee, for coming to us on the Lights on Data show and presenting us all these wonderful ideas and teaching us how to create a data visualization that sticks and really a data story that sticks. And it's all starts with that intent before content concept that you came up with, and I think it's brilliant. So thank you so much for sharing all these best practices with us.
Yeah, I'm hoping that the audience can take one of these ideas and start trying them out and seeing if it works for them.
Absolutely. And please follow Lee Feinberg on LinkedIn. You'll have lots to learn from him. And Decision Viz as well. Go check it out. All right.
Awesome.
See you next week, and have a great weekend ahead. Bye, everyone.
So long.